My son called me useless in front of the whole street. Not "Dad's having a rough day." Useless. Like I was something you throw out with the trash. It started with a bump. I clipped his truck backing out of my own driveway. Barely a scratch, maybe a dent in the bumper. I hadn't taken my blood pressure pill right that morning, took two by mistake, felt dizzy for a second, and that second cost me. Bradley came running out of his house like the world was ending. Didn't ask if I was okay, didn't check if I'd hit my head or blacked out, just started screaming. "Are you kidding me? Do you know how much that truck cost?" I told him I was sorry, told him I'd pay for it. He wasn't hearing any of that. "You shouldn't even be driving anymore, old man. You're gonna kill somebody. You're gonna kill yourself." Mrs. Patterson from next door was out watering her flowers. She stopped and looked over. I saw her looking. Bradley saw her too, and instead of lowering his voice, he raised it. "This is what happens. This is exactly what happens when you let somebody his age keep the keys." 71 years old, and my own son was talking about me like I was a dog that needed to be put down. I built houses for 40 years, poured foundations in July heat that would knock a younger man flat. I taught that boy to ride a bike, to shave, to drive the very truck he was standing next to now, screaming at me over a dent I was already offering to pay for. His wife Courtney came out next, arms crossed, that look on her face she gets when she thinks she's better than everybody on the block. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. She just stood there next to him, nodding, like she was watching a show she'd been waiting to see for a long time. "Bradley," I said, "it was an accident. I've got the checkbook right here. Tell me what it costs." "It's not about the money, Dad." He said that, and I want you to remember he said that, because money is exactly what this turned out to be about. It's about you not being safe anymore. Maybe it's time somebody else started handling things for you. Handling things. I heard those words and something in my chest went cold, colder than the dent in his bumper ever was. "I'm not a piece of property, Bradley. I'm your father." "Then start acting like it, instead of a liability." Liability. 40 years of showing up for that boy, and that's the word he had ready in his mouth, like he'd been saving it up. I didn't argue with him out there in the driveway. Wasn't gonna give Mrs. Patterson or anybody else more of a show than they'd already gotten. I told him I'd pay for the repair, turned around and went inside my own house, like a man leaving a job site he no longer had authority over. I live alone, have since my wife Diane passed 6 years ago. The house gets quiet in a way that used to bother me, and now I've just gotten used to it. I made coffee. My hands were shaking a little, and I told myself it was just the 2 pills, nothing more. I sat at the kitchen table where Diane and I used to do the crossword, and for a second I almost called out to her before I remembered. That's when I heard voices outside my kitchen window. Bradley and Courtney hadn't gone back inside their own house. They were standing by his truck, low voices, but my kitchen window was cracked open, and sound carries in this neighborhood better than people think, especially on a still afternoon like that one. If the doctor puts anything in writing about him being confused, I couldn't catch all of it. Courtney's voice cut in, sharper, more sure of herself than I'd ever heard her. "Faster than waiting around for him to just die on his own, Bradley. We don't have time for—" I stood in my kitchen with my coffee going cold in my hand. 40 years of pouring foundations, 40 years of knowing when something underneath a house was cracked before it ever showed on the surface, and I was hearing the same kind of crack now, except this one was in my own family, and it was already further along than I wanted to believe. They weren't talking about a fender bender anymore. They were talking about me, about how long I had left and what they planned to do with the time before that. I set my coffee cup down so quiet I didn't even hear it touch the counter. 40 years of building things that was supposed to last, and I was standing in my own kitchen, finding out my own son was already measuring me for a coffin and doing the math on what came after. If you've ever had someone you raised look at you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved, you know exactly what was sitting in my chest right then. If this story's hitting close to home for you, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I want to know who's out there listening to this with me, because what I heard through that window was only the beginning.
3 days after the driveway, Bradley called and said Courtney wanted me over for Sunday dinner. Family thing, he said, like nothing had happened. I should have known better. I went anyway because he's still my son and Liam's still my grandson, and some habits don't die just because you finally see clearly. Their house sits out in Broken Arrow, bigger than anything Bradley's paycheck should afford, which I found out later wasn't a coincidence. Courtney answered the door in a dress that cost more than my truck payment and smiled at me like she was greeting a delivery man. "Rodney, so glad you could make it." Not Dad. Never Dad. 15 years married to my son, and she's never once called me that, and I stopped expecting it a long time ago. Bradley's business partner was there too, some slick fella named Wade, shaking my hand too hard, telling me what an honor it was to finally meet the legend. I didn't like the sound of that word in his mouth. Legends are for men who are already gone. We sat down to eat, and it didn't take 10 minutes before Bradley steered the conversation exactly where he wanted it. "Dad, we were thinking, with everything that happened this week, maybe it's time we talked about you signing some things over, just so things are easier for everybody." "Easier for who, Bradley?" Wade laughed like I'd made a joke. Courtney didn't laugh. She just watched me the way you watch a fire you're hoping catches. "For you, mostly," Bradley said. "You're 71, Dad. You backed into a parked truck in your own driveway. What happens next time? What happens when you leave the stove on or wander off somewhere and can't find your way back? We're just trying to think ahead." "I'm not senile. I made a mistake with my pills, that's it." Courtney set her fork down slow, like she'd been waiting all night for her turn. "That's exactly the kind of thing that starts small, Rodney. My grandmother forgot her own name by the end. It happens fast once it starts." "I remember my own name just fine, Courtney. Do you remember whose money bought that dress?" Liam, my grandson, 13 years old and already smarter than both his parents combined, looked down at his plate like he wanted to disappear through the floor. He didn't say a word the whole meal. I caught his eyes once, just once, and there was something in 'em, not embarrassment, warning. Wade tried to smooth things over, started talking about some investment opportunity, some restaurant franchise he and Bradley were looking at, needed a little runway to get off the ground. Bradley wouldn't quite look at me while Wade talked numbers, wouldn't quite look at me at all, actually, and that told me plenty. "You need money," I said, just like that, right at the table, no dressing it up. The silence that followed told me I was right. "It's an investment, Dad, not charity. Wade's got the numbers, the projections, everything. We just need someone with capital who believes in—" "You mean someone with capital who's too old and confused to say no." Bradley's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is a man getting called a liability in his own driveway by his own son, and 3 days later that same son wants to talk about my capital." Courtney's mask slipped for half a second. "We're trying to help you, and this is the thanks we get? You've always been like this, ungrateful, difficult. No wonder Mom left." That last part landed exactly where she meant it to. Diane didn't leave. Diane died. Courtney knew that better than anybody, and she said it right there at her own dinner table, in front of her son, in front of a stranger named Wade who had no business hearing any of it. I stood up, told Bradley I was leaving, thanked Courtney for a meal I never should have come to, and told Liam I'd see him soon. He nodded, still not saying anything, and I noticed his hand was shaking a little around his fork. On my way out, I passed by Bradley's home office, door left half open. I wasn't snooping, I want to be clear about that. I was looking for my jacket, which I'd left on the chair in there earlier when Courtney took my coat. That's when I saw the folder sitting open on his desk. Papers with letterhead I recognized, a name I knew from somewhere, something about capacity evaluation, and a line near the bottom that made my stomach drop clean through the floor. A date, next Tuesday, my name on it. I didn't get a chance to read the rest before I heard Courtney's heels coming down the hallway behind me, and I had about 2 seconds to decide whether to grab that folder or walk out that door like I'd never seen it at all. I grabbed the folder. Didn't think it through. Didn't have time to think it through. Rolled it up under my jacket and walked out that door with my heart going harder than it had since the day in the driveway. Courtney said something to my back about forgetting my coat, and I mumbled something back and just kept walking to my truck. Sat in that driveway for 10 minutes before I could make my hand stop shaking enough to read it properly. Capacity evaluation. A doctor's name I didn't recognize, some independent psychiatric consultant, an appointment set for the following Tuesday, my name and date of birth typed in clean and official, like it was already decided. Underneath that, a separate sheet, a letter drafted to file with the county, something about guardianship proceedings in the event capacity is found to be diminished. They hadn't even talked to me about it. They'd already scheduled it, already drafted the paperwork. My own son had a lawyer working on declaring me unfit before I'd even finished my second cup of coffee that Sunday morning. I didn't sleep much that night. Next morning, first thing, I drove downtown to my bank, not the branch by my house, the main one, the one I'd used since before Bradley was born. I've known Jade at that bank for going on 6 years. She helped me set up Diane's accounts after she passed, patient as anything with an old man who didn't know a debit card from a credit card back then. She's the kind of person who remembers your name and asks about your knee replacement without you having to remind her you had one. She pulled my accounts up and her face changed before I'd even finished explaining why I was there. "Mr. Roberson, I probably shouldn't say anything, but your son was in here Thursday." My stomach dropped the same way it had at that desk in Broken Arrow. "Doing what?" "Asking about the accounts you two have joint access on, asking what it would take to get expanded authority if there was a medical situation. I told her he couldn't discuss that without you present, but—" She hesitated, glanced toward the manager's office like she was worried about being overheard. He didn't like hearing that. "Did he file anything?" "Not that I processed, but, Mr. Roberson, if there's a guardianship filing anywhere in the works, and I'm not saying there is, I'm just saying the accounts could get frozen or redirected depending on what a judge signs off on. You'd want to get ahead of that."
40 years pouring concrete, and I never once felt the ground shift under me the way it did sitting in that little office with Jade sliding paperwork across the desk. We spent the next hour tightening everything down, removing Bradley from any authorized access he'd talked his way onto over the years, which turned out to be more than I remembered giving him, setting up alerts on every account. Jade even helped me draft a note to send to my safety deposit box records, just in case. "You're doing the right thing," she said, low, like she wasn't supposed to say that either. My own mother went through something similar with my brother, It gets ugly fast when money's involved. Doesn't matter whose blood you share. I was walking out to the parking garage, folder of new paperwork under my arm, feeling like I'd finally done something instead of just absorbing hits, when I saw Bradley's truck pull in fast, too fast, tires chirping against the concrete. He must have gotten a call, maybe from someone in that branch. Maybe Courtney had a contact there I didn't know about. Didn't matter how. He was out of that truck before it even finished rolling to a stop, and the look on his face wasn't a son worried about his father anymore. It was a man watching money walk away from him. "What did you do?" He was closing the distance between us fast, finger already pointed at my chest before he even got close enough. "Dad, what the hell did you do in there?" "Protected what's mine, something you should try sometime instead of protecting Wade's restaurant." "You had no right going behind my back like this." "Behind your back?" I laughed, and it came out uglier than I meant it to. "You scheduled a doctor to declare me incompetent without telling me a single word about it, and you want to talk to me about going behind backs." His face went white for half a second, that particular white a man goes when he realizes he's been caught. Then it came back red, angrier than before. "You don't understand what you're doing. You don't understand what's at stake here." "I understand exactly what's at stake, Bradley. Your restaurant, Wade's investment, and a father who's more useful to you unconscious in a hospital bed than sitting across a dinner table telling you no." A security guard from the garage had started walking our way, slow, watching us the way you watch two men who might be about to throw hands in a parking structure. Bradley saw him too, and for a second I thought that would be the end of it, that he'd back off, get back in his truck, go home and cool down. Instead, he leaned in close, voice dropped low enough that only I could hear it, and said something that told me this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a plan, and I'd only just found the first page of it. What Bradley said in that parking garage, low enough that only I could hear it, was this: "You'll sign back over what's mine, Dad, one way or another. Doctor's appointment still on the books for Tuesday, whether you like it or not." Mine. Not ours. Not what we need help with. Mine. Like he'd already done the math and decided everything I'd built over 40 years belonged to him the second a doctor put his signature on a piece of paper. I didn't answer him in that garage, just got in my truck and drove home with my hands locked tight around the wheel, replaying that word over and over. Mine. Tuesday came 4 days later. I didn't go to the appointment. Didn't call to cancel it either. Just let it sit there unanswered, the way you'd let a phone ring out when you already know who's calling and you're not ready for that conversation yet. Wednesday evening, my doorbell rang. I looked through the side window before I opened it, and there they were, both of 'em, Bradley and Courtney, standing on my porch like a debt collection agency. I opened the door anyway. Wasn't gonna hide in my own house. "You missed your appointment," Bradley said. "No hello, no how are you. Wasn't my appointment, was yours. You scheduled it, remember? Never asked me a single thing about it." Courtney pushed past me into my own living room without an invitation, same as she'd done everything else that month, taking whatever she wanted without asking. Bradley followed her in. "Dad, we need to talk about this like adults." "Funny you'd bring up acting like adults, considering you've spent the last 2 weeks trying to get a judge to declare me a child." That landed. I saw it land. Courtney recovered first.
"Rodney, nobody's trying to hurt you. We're trying to get you help before something worse happens. What if you'd hit a person instead of a truck? What if you have another episode and there's nobody there?" There was nobody there for 6 years since Diane died, and I managed fine. Where exactly was this concern before Wade needed money for his restaurant? Bradley's face went tight. This has nothing to do with Wade. It has everything to do with Wade. You think I'm stupid, Bradley? I poured concrete for men smarter than you for 40 years, and I could always tell when one of them was about to go under. You're drowning, and instead of asking your father for help like a man, you decided it'd be easier to just take it. That's not... He stopped himself, and in that half-second of silence I watched him decide whether to keep lying or finally say something true. He chose true, and it came out uglier than any lie could have. Fine. You want the truth? Yeah, we need the money. Yeah, the restaurant's underwater, and Wade's about to lose everything, and so are we. And you're sitting on a paid-off house and savings that are just gonna rot in a bank account until you die anyway. What difference does it make if it comes to us now instead of later? There it was. Everything Courtney's whispering in my kitchen window had promised, finally said out loud in my own living room. The difference, Bradley, is that right now I'm alive to say no. You're being selfish. I built that house you grew up in with my own 2 hands after work, on weekends, on holidays I should have spent resting. I paid for your college, your wedding, bailed you out of that first business that went under, and you have the nerve to stand in my living room and call me selfish because I won't hand over what's left before I'm even in the ground. Courtney's voice sharpened, that same cruelty from the dinner table coming back out. You know what everyone in this family says about you? That you're impossible, that you've always cared more about your money than your own son. Bradley's ashamed of you, Rodney. He doesn't say it, but I will. You're an embarrassment. I've been called a lot of things by a lot of people over 71 years, but nothing that ever cut quite as clean as hearing my daughter-in-law call me an embarrassment in the house I built with my own back, while my son stood there and let her say it. Get out. Dad, come on, let's just get out of my house, both of you. Bradley's jaw worked like he wanted to say something else, something worse, but he must have seen something in my face that told him not to push it further that night. He grabbed Courtney's arm and steered her toward the door, but she got one more shot in on her way out. You're going to regret this, old man. Tuesday's appointment isn't the only one on the books. The door slammed behind them hard enough to rattle the picture frames in the hallway, the ones with Diane in them, the ones with Bradley as a boy in a Little League uniform I paid $40 out of, a paycheck that barely covered groceries that month. I sat back down in my chair, hands still shaking, and for a long while I just listened to the quiet of my own house, the same quiet that used to feel like loneliness, and now felt like the only honest thing left in my life. 3 days later, a man in a cheap suit knocked on my door and handed me an envelope with the Tulsa County Courthouse seal stamped across the top. I didn't need to open it to know what it was, but I opened it anyway, and what I read on that first page told me they hadn't been bluffing about anything.
The envelope was a formal guardianship petition. Rodney Roberson, petitioner, asking the court to declare me incapacitated and appoint him as guardian over my person and my finances. Attached was a letter from some psychiatrist I'd never met saying he'd reviewed reported behavioral changes and recommended a formal evaluation. Reported by who, it didn't say. Didn't have to. I already knew. I called Shannon Kahn the same afternoon. She's handled legal work for men I used to work construction with, tough as anybody I ever poured concrete alongside, and she didn't waste time being gentle with me about what I was facing. This is aggressive, Mr. Roberson. Someone's in a hurry. She read through the petition twice, then looked up at me. Good news is, aggressive and sloppy usually go together. Let's see what they actually have. What they had, it turned out, was almost nothing. No independent medical exam, a psychiatrist's letter based on second-hand claims from Bradley and Courtney, not a single hour spent examining me.
statements from neighbors that Shannon's investigator tracked down and re-interviewed, only to find out most of them, including Mrs. Patterson, said they'd never actually witnessed any confusion, just Bradley talking loudly about it after the fact. "They built a case out of gossip," said Shannon. "That's not evidence. That's a rumor with a court filing fee attached." She also pulled banking records, the ones Jade had helped me lock down weeks earlier, and lined them up next to Wade's restaurant filings, which were public enough to find without much digging. Bradley and Courtney had personally guaranteed a business loan 6 months earlier. The restaurant was 2 payments behind. Wade had already had 1 visit from a collections attorney. "This isn't about your health, Mr. Roberson. This is about a business going under and a son who needs your money before the bank takes what he's already put up as collateral." The hearing was set for a Thursday morning at the Tulsa County Courthouse, a plain brick building downtown I'd walked past 100 times without ever thinking I'd end up in a courtroom in it, fighting my own son for the right to be considered a competent man. Bradley showed up in a suit that looked new, probably bought for the occasion. Courtney sat beside him, hair done, face arranged into something meant to look worried and loving. Liam wasn't there. I was glad for that. 13-year-olds shouldn't have to watch their father do what Bradley was about to do. The judge, an older woman named Patricia Alvarez, moved through things quick and without patience for theatrics. Bradley's attorney tried to open with the psychiatrist's letter, and Judge Alvarez stopped him cold. "Your Honor, this letter says the doctor never examined Mr. Roberson directly. On what basis is he offering a clinical opinion?" "Your Honor, based on reports from family members regarding..." "Then it's not a medical opinion, counselor. It's hearsay wearing a lab coat. I'll need an actual independent evaluation before I take any of this seriously. And frankly, I'm not seeing why we're here at all without one."
Shannon stood then, calm as anything, and laid out what she'd found. The loan, the missed payments, the timeline showing the guardianship petition filed 1 week after I'd tightened access to my own bank accounts. The neighbors who'd since walked back their statements once someone actually asked them a direct question instead of just nodding along to Bradley's version of things. This petition wasn't filed out of concern for my client's well-being, Your Honor. It was filed because my client stopped giving his son unrestricted access to his money, and his son is facing serious financial consequences as a result. Bradley's face went the same white it had gone in that parking garage. Courtney's composed little expression cracked for the first time since they'd sat down. Judge Alvarez didn't take long to decide. She dismissed the petition outright, said there was no credible evidence of incapacity, and told Bradley's attorney, not unkindly but not gently either, that filings like this needed a lot more than a family dispute over money dressed up as medical concern. Outside the courthouse, Bradley caught up to me on the steps. No suit jacket now, tie loosened, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in 1 morning. "Dad, please, we're going to lose everything. The house, the restaurant, all of it." I looked at him a long moment. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike in a driveway 2 miles from where we were standing. You should have thought about that before you tried to have me declared unfit to say no to you. I panicked. I know I handled it wrong. You didn't handle it wrong, Bradley. You handled it exactly the way you meant to. You just didn't expect me to fight back. Courtney stood a few steps down, arms crossed, saying nothing now that there was no one left to perform for. I didn't yell, didn't need to anymore. I already changed some things with my estate while all this was going on. Nothing's final yet, but it's not going to look the way you were counting on. I walked down those courthouse steps alone, past the 2 of them, out into a parking lot full of ordinary people handling ordinary business,
and for the first time in weeks, my chest felt like my own again. Liam texted me that night, just 3 words, "Proud of you, Grandpa." I sat with that a long time before I answered him back.